When 10-year-old Maya showed up to the town picnic with another faded purple bruise on her shin, she had a ready-made story about a clumsy slide tackle in soccer practice. It was a good story, believable and well-rehearsed, one she told to teachers, to friends, and even to herself in the mirror. But her 7-year-old sister, Lily, knew the truth. As she stood in the shadow of a mountain of a man in a leather vest, a man whose road name was Styx, Lily saw something in his quiet, watchful eyes that no other adult had. With a trembling voice, she whispered a 5-word confession that shattered the summer air. "She's not playing soccer, mister." That simple, terrified statement, a desperate plea from a child who had run out of hope, activated instincts in Styx that had been forged in the crucible of war. It set off a chain of events that would unravel a dark secret festering behind the closed doors of a picture-perfect suburban home and prove that sometimes, the most fearsome-looking angels don't have wings, they have chrome and steel. The 4th of July painted the town of Harmony Creek in broad, cheerful strokes of red, white, and blue. Lakeside Park was the town's beating heart, and today it pounded with the rhythm of celebration. The air, thick with humidity, carried the holy trinity of summer scents: freshly cut grass, sizzling barbecue, and the faint, sweet perfume of blooming honeysuckle. Families sprawled across checkered blankets, children with faces sticky from watermelon chased each other in dizzying circles, and teenagers tossed frisbees with feigned indifference. It was a scene of idyllic American life, a postcard come to life, and at the center of it all, providing the soundtrack of rumbling engines and the main course of smoked brisket, were the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club. To outsiders, they might have looked like an invading force. Big men, clad in leather cuts bearing the club's emblem, a stoic, iron-willed eagle gripping a wrench. Their bikes, polished beasts of chrome and thunder, were lined up with military precision near the pavilion. But the people of Harmony Creek knew better. The Iron Sentinels were not a threat, they were a fixture. They organized toy drives at Christmas, escorted military funerals, and every 4th of July, they hosted this barbecue, with all proceeds going to the local volunteer fire department. They were the town's resident guardians, gruff and intimidating on the surface, but with a collective heart of gold that beat in time with the community they served. Manning the main grill was a man they called Styx. At 52, Styx was leaner than most of his brothers, built like a gnarled oak branch, not massive, but unbreakable. His road name was a testament to his wiry frame, a frame that had carried him through 3 tours as an army ranger. His face was a roadmap of his life, etched with lines of laughter and loss. His sander-brown hair was streaked with grey and pulled back in a short, neat ponytail. His arms, covered in intricate tattoos that told stories of brotherhood and remembrance, expertly flipped burgers and hot dogs. But it was his eyes that set him apart. They were a pale, piercing blue, and they were never still. They scanned, they assessed, they observed. It was a habit forged in places where a moment of inattention could be the last moment of your life. In the relative peace of Harmony Creek, that habit had never truly faded. He saw everything. He saw the mayor trying to flirt with the new librarian. He saw a teenager sneak a sip from his father's beer. And he saw the family as they approached his grill. They looked perfect, almost too perfect. The man, who Styx would later learn was named Frank, wore a crisp red polo shirt and khaki shorts. He had a salesman's smile, wide and toothy, but it never quite reached his eyes. The woman, Sarah, was beautiful but fragile, like a porcelain doll that had been glued back together one too many times. She held a limp hand over her eyes to shield them from the sun, but it looked more like a shield against the world. And then there were the girls. The older one, Maya, had her mother's delicate features but a forced bravery in her posture. She walked with a slight limp, and her eyes darted around, never settling on anything for too long. A faint, yellowish bruise marked the skin of her forearm, just below the sleeve of her t-shirt. The younger one, Lily, was her sister's shadow. She clung to her mother's leg, her small face a mask of anxiety, her thumb plugged firmly in her mouth. She looked at the world from behind a curtain of blonde hair, as if afraid of what she might see. 2 hot dogs and 2 burgers, please, Frank boomed, his voice overly cheerful. He placed a heavy hand on Maya's shoulder. My little soccer star here has worked up quite an appetite, haven't you, champ? Styx saw Maya flinch, a microscopic tremor that no one else would have noticed. He saw the way her smile became a thin, brittle line on her face. He nodded, his face impassive, and began plating the food. His hands worked on autopilot, but his mind was already running diagnostics. The man's grip was too tight. The girl's reaction was too practiced. The mother's silence was too loud. It was just a feeling, a whisper of wrongness on the summer breeze, but Styx had learned long ago to trust those whispers. They were the ghosts of past mistakes, the echoes of things he'd seen that he could never unsee. He knew what a proud father looked like. He knew what a happy family felt like. This wasn't it. This was a performance. A carefully staged play for the public, and he could see the cracks in the scenery. As he handed the plates over, his gaze met Maya's for a fraction of a second. He saw it then, behind the forced cheerfulness. Fear. It was a look he recognized from the faces of cornered animals and terrified civilians in war-torn villages. It was a look of pure, unadulterated dread. And it was directed not at him, but at the man smiling beside her, the man who called her his champ. The family moved away, finding a spot on a blue and white checkered blanket under a large oak tree. Styx watched them go, the smell of charcoal and sizzling meat suddenly turning acrid in his nostrils. The perfect summer day had just developed a dark and ominous cloud, one that only he could see. Styx kept them in his peripheral vision as he continued to serve the long line of hungry townspeople. He was a master of divided attention, a skill honed by years of standing guard while his unit slept. He could flip a dozen burgers, make small talk about the weather, and simultaneously track the subtle interplay of the family under the oak tree. He watched Frank take a large bite of his burger, talking animatedly with his mouth full, gesturing with a plastic fork. He saw Sarah pick at her food, her movement small and hesitant. He saw Maya eat her hot dog with a mechanical precision, her eyes fixed on the distant shimmer of the lake. His training had taught him to look for anomalies, for breaks in the pattern of normal life. And this family was a collection of them. Frank's joviality was a performance, a loud, obnoxious broadcast of normalcy designed to drown out the silence beneath. Sarah's passivity was a surrender, her spirit seemingly eroded away. Maya's practiced composure was a shield, a fragile wall built to hide the terror behind it. And little Lily, she was the fuse. She was a tiny, silent bomb of truth, just waiting for the right moment to detonate. He saw Frank lean over and say something sharp to Maya. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw the effect. The girl's shoulders hunched. She put her hot dog down, her appetite gone. Frank then reached out and brushed a crumb from her cheek, the gesture meant to look affectionate, but his fingers lingered too long, his touch possessive, a brand of ownership. Styx felt a low growl rumble in his chest, an primal, protective instinct that had been dormant for years. He knew the look of a predator. He had seen it in the eyes of insurgents and in the cold, flat stare of men who enjoyed the suffering of others. He was seeing it now, in a park, on the 4th of July, in the face of a man in a red polo shirt. A few minutes later, Frank was engaged in a loud conversation with a neighbor who had wandered over to their blanket. He was boasting about a recent promotion at work, his voice carrying across the lawn. It was the distraction Lily had been waiting for. She slid off the blanket, her movement small and furtive, and made her way toward the beverage station next to the grill, where Styx was now restocking bottles of water in a large ice chest. She approached him cautiously, her eyes wide and serious. She looked like a tiny spy on a life-or-death mission. She stopped a few feet away, her hands clasped behind her back. "Can I have a water, please?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Of course, little one," Styx said, his own voice gentle, deliberately soft so as not to spook her. He pulled a cold bottle from the ice and wiped the condensation off with a rag. As he knelt down to her level to hand it to her, she took a quick, nervous glance back toward her family. Frank was still talking, his back to them. Her mother was staring blankly at the lake. Maya was watching Lily, her expression a mixture of terror and hope. Lily leaned in close, her breath warm and smelling of ketchup against his ear. "She pretends the bruises are from soccer," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush, as if she were afraid they would get stuck if she hesitated. "But they're not." Styx didn't move. He didn't breathe. The world seemed to narrow to the space between him and this tiny, brave girl. The sounds of the picnic, the laughter, the music, the distant pop of an early firecracker, all faded into a dull, muffled roar. She pulled back slightly, her big blue eyes searching his face for a reaction. Seeing something she trusted, she leaned in again and delivered the final, damning piece of information. "He gets mad," she whispered. A lot, and then she was gone. She snatched the water bottle, scurried back to the blanket, and resumed her position as her mother's shadow, leaving Sticks kneeling on the grass. The cold from the ice chest seeped into his jeans, but a different, deeper chill spread through his entire body. It was the icy certainty of truth. The whispers of suspicion had just become a full-throated scream. He looked over at the family under the tree, and the scene was no longer just wrong, it was sinister. The smiling man was a monster. The quiet woman was a hostage. And the two little girls were prisoners of a war being fought in their own home. In that moment, the park, the barbecue, the entire celebration ceased to exist for Sticks. He was no longer a biker flipping burgers. He was a ranger, and he had just received actionable intelligence from a source on the ground. A mission had just been initiated. And he would not fail. A cold, calm clarity descended over Sticks. The rage was there, a white-hot coil in his gut, but it was contained, controlled. Rage was a fuel, not a tool. Panic was a luxury he could not afford. His mind, trained for rapid threat assessment and tactical response, began to cycle through options. A direct confrontation was out. It would be his word against Frank's, and it would put the girls, especially Lily, in immediate and severe danger. Frank would deny everything, paint him as some crazed biker menacing his family, and the girls would pay the price for it later, in silence and pain. No, this had to be handled with precision. It required strategy. He stood up, his movements fluid and deliberate. He caught the eye of his club president, Duke, who was holding court by the keg. Duke was a massive man with a beard that seemed to contain its own gravitational pull, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. He had been a police sergeant for 20 years before retiring. He knew the look on Sticks's face. He had seen it before on patrol, the look of a man who had just seen something that could not be unseen. Sticks gave a short, almost imperceptible nod towards the family under the tree. He then tapped 2 fingers against his temple, a silent signal they had used for years. It meant, eyes on. Potential threat. Stand by. Duke's jovial expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. He subtly turned his body to get a better view of Frank's family, his gaze sweeping over them with a practiced, analytical eye. He nodded back at Sticks, a single, sharp dip of his chin. Message received. Sticks pulled his phone from the pocket of his jeans. His fingers, usually steady, trembled slightly as he scrolled through his contacts. He bypassed 911. A uniformed response would be too overt, too chaotic. It would give Frank time to coach the girls, to intimidate them back into silence. He needed someone who would understand the delicate nature of the situation. He found the number he was looking for, Mark Donovan, a retired sheriff's deputy who now worked as a private investigator. More importantly, Donovan was a friend of the club and owed Sticks a favor. He typed out a short, concise text, using the language of his former profession. Donovan. Need discreet welfare check. Lakeside Park, South End by the Big Oak. Man, red polo, with wife and 2 girls, approx 7 and 10. Suspected domestic abuse, child victim. Active situation. Need quiet, plainclothes approach. High-risk target. Urgent. He hit send. Now, he had to control the environment until help arrived. He had to keep Frank from leaving, and he had to create an opportunity to separate the girls from him, even for a moment. He needed his brothers. He walked over to Grizz, a bear of a man with a surprisingly gentle touch, who was organizing a 3-legged race for the kids. Grizz, Stick said, his voice low and even. I need a sack race. Right now. Over by the oak tree. And I need you to make sure those 2 little girls, the ones on the blue blanket, get invited to join. Make it sound like the most fun they'll ever have. Grizz didn't ask questions. He saw the ice in Styx's eyes and knew this was not a request. On it, he rumbled, and immediately began shouting in his booming voice, "All right, kids. Time for the championship sack race. Prizes for everyone who enters." Next, Styx walked back to Duke. "Donovan is on his way. Plainclothes. We need to keep that guy." He jerked his chin toward Frank, occupied and anchored to that spot until they get here. Duke's eyes hardened. "What did you see?" "Enough," Styx replied. "The little one talked to me. Said the Bruises aren't from soccer. Said he gets mad." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and ugly. Duke's face darkened with a controlled fury. He was a father and a grandfather. There was no crime he held in greater contempt. "Consider him anchored," Duke said, his voice a low growl. The plan was in motion. It was a delicate dance of deception and control. Duke, the charismatic leader, ambled over to Frank's blanket, a plastic cup of beer in his hand. "Hey there. Frank, right? Heard you work over at the dealership. I've been thinking about trading in my old truck. You got a minute to talk shop?" he asked, his voice friendly and disarming. Frank, preening at the attention from the club's president, was easily drawn in. He launched into a detailed pitch about the latest models, his ego stroked. He was distracted. Phase 1 was complete. Meanwhile, Grizz had gathered a small crowd of excited children for the sack race. He strode over to the blanket. "Hey now, we can't have the sack race without our local soccer star," he boomed, smiling at Maya. "You and your sister have to join. It's the rules." Maya looked nervously at Frank, who was deep in conversation with Duke. Her mother, Sarah, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of permission. It was the first sign of defiance Styx had seen from her. A flicker of hope ignited in his chest. With a shared, fearful glance, Maya and Lily slipped away from the blanket and joined the other children, hopping into burlap sacks. They were 20 feet away from their stepfather. It wasn't much, but it was a world of distance. It was a chance. Styx watched from the grill, his body tense, a pair of tongs clutched in his hand like a weapon. The park was still a picture of summer joy, but for him, it had become a tactical grid. His brothers were in position. The targets were separated. The clock was ticking. He prayed Donovan would get his message. He prayed he would get there in time. The sack race was a chaotic explosion of laughter and tumbling children. For a few precious moments, Maya and Lily looked like any other kids at a picnic. They giggled as they fell, their faces flushed with exertion, the shadows momentarily chased away by the simple joy of the game. Styx watched them, a fierce, protective ache in his chest. This was what they deserved. A life filled with scraped knees from playing, not from being pushed. Frank's attention began to waver. His conversation with Duke was winding down, and his eyes kept flicking over to the sack race. An ugly, possessive look crept onto his face. He didn't like his stepdaughters being out of his immediate control. Styx could see the irritation building, the mask of the friendly family man beginning to slip. "All right, girls, that's enough," Frank called out, his voice cutting through the children's laughter. "Time to pack it up. We're leaving." The smiles vanished from Maya and Lily's faces, replaced by the familiar look of dread. The game was over? The brief moment of freedom had ended. This was the moment of escalation. Styx knew it. Duke knew it. Frank stood up, brushing crumbs from his shorts. "Come on, now," he said, his voice taking on a hard, impatient edge. Just as he took a step toward the girls, two men appeared at the edge of the clearing. They didn't look like cops. One wore a fishing vest over a Hawaiian shirt, the other a faded baseball cap and jeans. They looked like a couple of dads who had wandered over from another picnic. But Styx recognized one of them. It was Donovan. His prayer had been answered. Donovan's eyes met Styx's for a split second. Styx gave a slight, almost invisible shake of his head. "Not him." The girls. Donovan understood. He and his partner split up. The partner, a younger man with a calm demeanor, headed directly for Frank, intercepting him. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice pleasant. "I'm sorry to bother you, but is that your silver sedan over there? Looks like someone might have backed into it." It was a perfect, disarming lie. Frank stopped, momentarily thrown off balance. "What? My car?" He was annoyed, but the concern for his vehicle overrode his impatience to leave. While Frank was distracted, Donovan walked over to the edge of the sack race, where a female officer in a simple polo shirt and slacks was now kneeling, pretending to tie her shoe. She had arrived separately, another piece of the quiet, tactical response. She looked up at Maya and Lily as Grizz helped them out of their sacks. "Wow, you two are fast," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I bet you guys are tired. My name is Kate. I'm a friend of Mr. Sticks over there. He said you two might like some ice cream." The girls looked from Kate to Sticks, who gave them a small, reassuring nod. They were hesitant, but Kate's voice was kind, and the mention of Sticks's name seemed to be a password they understood. Kate lowered her voice slightly. "I heard you're a really good soccer player," she said to Maya. "It's a tough sport. You must get a lot of bruises." Maya's guard went up instantly. "I'm fine," she said, the rehearsed line coming out automatically. Kate didn't push. She turned her attention to the younger sister. "And what about you?" she asked Lily gently. "Do you play any sports?" Lily shook her head, her eyes welling up with tears. She looked at her sister, then at the kind face of the woman in front of her, and then back at her stepfather, who was now arguing with the plainclothes officer about his car. It was all too much. The secret was too heavy. "He's lying," Lily whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Maya's not playing soccer. He pushes her." It was all Kate needed. She put a comforting arm around Lily. Then she looked at Maya, her eyes full of compassion. "Maya, is that true? Is he hurting you?" For a moment, Maya hesitated. Years of fear and intimidation warred with the flicker of hope this stranger offered. She looked at Sticks, standing like a sentinel by the grill. She looked at Grizz, who was standing nearby, a silent, protective wall of a man. She looked at her little sister, who was sobbing for her. And finally, the dam broke. Maya began to cry, silent, racking sobs that shook her small body. She nodded, unable to speak. Then, with trembling fingers, she lifted the back of her shirt. The bruises there were not like the faded yellow one on her arm. They were a horrifying constellation of deep purple and angry red, some new, some old, mapping a story of unspeakable cruelty across her fragile back. Across the lawn, Frank saw it. He saw the lifted shirt, the gasp from the female officer. The jig was up. Panic flashed in his eyes. He shoved the other officer aside and lunged toward the girls. "Get away from them," he screamed, his face a twisted mask of rage. He never made it. Before he had taken 2 steps, his path was blocked. Duke, Grizz, and 3 other members of the Iron Sentinels had materialized out of nowhere, forming a silent, immovable wall of leather and muscle between him and the children. They didn't touch him. They didn't speak. They just stood there, their presence more intimidating than any weapon. Frank skidded to a halt, his rage turning to fear as he looked at the cold, unforgiving faces of the men in front of him. His escape was cut off. His authority was gone. He was trapped. Donovan stepped forward, his badge now visible in his hand. "Frank Miller," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "You are under arrest for child abuse and assault." The threat was neutralized. The rescue was complete. As handcuffs clicked around Frank's wrists, the entire picnic seemed to hold its breath. The postcard had been torn in 2, revealing the ugly truth behind the perfect picture. The immediate aftermath was a blur of controlled, professional activity. Frank, sputtering denials and threats, was led away to an unmarked car. His public performance had crumbled, revealing the pathetic, cowardly bully underneath. Sarah, the girl's mother, who had been frozen in place on the blanket, finally broke down. She collapsed into sobs of what looked like equal parts terror, shame, and overwhelming relief. The female officer, Kate, gently guided her away from the prying eyes of the crowd, speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. Donovan walked over to Styx, who was still standing by the now-cold grill, the tongs hanging limply from his hand. The park was quiet, the festive atmosphere replaced by a stunned silence as people tried to process what they had just witnessed. "Your instincts were dead on, Styx," Donovan said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You and your boys handled this perfectly. You kept a lid on it, prevented him from bolting, and gave us the space we needed to work. This could have gone sideways fast if you just charged in." Styx just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. It wasn't praise he needed. It was the confirmation that the girls were finally safe. That was his validation. He watched as Kate brought Maya and Lily over to him. They were wrapped in blankets, their faces tear-streaked but no longer terrified. A new emotion was dawning in their eyes, relief. Lily, bolder now that the monster was gone, let go of the officer's hand and ran to Styx. She didn't say a word. She just wrapped her small arms around his leg and hugged it as tightly as she could. Styx reached down and rested his large, calloused hand on her head, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Thank you for listening to me," she mumbled into the denim of his jeans. "Always," Styx managed to say, his voice thick. Maya stood a few feet away, watching them. She was more reserved, older, and more aware of the gravity of the day. She clutched the blanket around her shoulders like armor. She looked up at Styx, and her eyes, clear of the fear that had clouded them for so long, held a depth of gratitude that no words could ever capture. "Thank you," she whispered. It was simple, but it was everything. It was thanks for seeing her, for believing her sister, for not looking away like so many others had. Before the officers took the girls to the station to give their official statements, Grizz appeared with 2 plates piled high with hot dogs and potato chips, and 2 cups of lemonade. "Can't go on a mission on an empty stomach," he rumbled, handing them the food. It was a small, simple act of kindness, a first step toward reclaiming a piece of the childhood that had been stolen from them. They sat on a park bench, eating quietly, protected by a circle of leather-clad guardians who kept the curious onlookers at a respectful distance. Styx watched them, the ache in his chest slowly transforming from anger into a profound sense of peace. He hadn't gone looking for a fight. He had just been flipping burgers. But a call for help had come in the form of a child's whisper, and he and his brothers had answered. As he watched the unmarked car pull away, carrying the 2 girls toward a new, safer beginning, he knew that this 4th of July barbecue was one he would never forget. It was the day the Iron Sentinels had lived up to their name, providing a shield for the innocent and proving that true strength is not measured in horsepower or muscle, but in the willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. 1 year later, the 4th of July returned to Harmony Creek. Lakeside Park was once again filled with families and the smell of barbecue. The Iron Sentinels were at their posts, the heart of the celebration. To most, it looked exactly the same as the year before. But for Styx, everything was different. The world felt safer, brighter. The story of the rescue had sent ripples through the community. Frank Miller was convicted on multiple counts of child abuse and was serving a 15-year sentence. He would not be a threat to anyone for a very long time. Sarah, the girl's mother, had entered intensive therapy. Freed from Frank's control, she began the long and difficult process of healing and learning to be the mother her daughters deserved. She and the girls had moved to a new town a few hours away to start fresh, supported by a network of social services that Styx and his club had helped them connect with. Maya and Lily were thriving. The bruises had long since faded, replaced by the healthy glow of happiness. Maya had joined her new school soccer team for real. She was their star forward, fast and fearless, her legs now covered in the proud scrapes and grass stains of a true athlete. She no longer had to lie about her injuries. Lily had shed her shyness, blossoming into a chatty, confident 8-year-old who was the president of her school's book club. The fear that had once haunted their eyes was gone, replaced by the bright, clear light of a future full of promise. The connection between them and Styx had not ended that day in the park. It had become a lasting bond. That first Christmas, a handmade card had arrived at the Iron Sentinels clubhouse. On the front was a crayon drawing by Lily. It depicted a giant, smiling biker with a grey ponytail, holding the hands of two small girls. Inside, in a child's wobbly script, it said, "To our guardian angel. Thank you for saving us. Love, Lily and Maya." Styx had carefully cut out the drawing and tucked it into the sun visor of his pickup truck. He looked at it every single day. Sarah called him once a month, just to check in and tell him about the girls' latest achievements, a winning goal, a spelling bee trophy, a new friend. Each call was a reminder of the good that can come from a single moment of courage. The impact of that day spread beyond just one family. Inspired by the events, the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club had formalized their role as protectors. They partnered with the county's Child Advocacy Center and established a new annual charity event, the Ride for the Silent. It was a massive motorcycle rally that drew bikers from all over the state, raising tens of thousands of dollars to support programs for abused and neglected children. The club's reputation was forever changed. They were no longer seen as intimidating outsiders, but as integral, respected members of the community, fierce guardians with a singular mission to protect the vulnerable. Their leather cuts had become a symbol of safety for every child in Harmony Creek. As the sun began to set on this 4th of July, casting long shadows across the park, Styx stood by the grill, a spatula in his hand and a deep sense of contentment in his heart. He watched a young father lift his giggling daughter onto his shoulders so she could see the first fireworks as they exploded in bursts of color against the darkening sky. He saw the pure, uncomplicated love between them, and he smiled. The world was full of noise, of distractions, of people too busy to notice the quiet signs of distress. But he had learned, through years of training and a lifetime of experience, the importance of listening past the noise. He knew that sometimes, the most desperate cries for help are not screams, but whispers. And that day, 1 year ago, he had been there to hear one. He had chosen to act, and in doing so, had changed the course of 2 young lives forever. The battle hadn't been fought on some foreign field, but right here, in this peaceful park. And it had been won not with a rifle, but with a listening ear and a heart that refused to look away.